I want you to just imagine a heavily armed factory operating in the middle of rural Wisconsin. This is in the summer of 1977.
Right, 1977.
Yeah, and there are guards. There's this really palpable sense of defiance, but the men inside this facility aren't stockpiling automatic weapons or anything like that.
No, they're not printing counterfeit money or,
Yeah.
building explosives.
Exactly. What they're doing is manufacturing an illegal, completely unapproved cancer cure. It's called lateral.
Yeah, way true.
And they are just openly daring the federal government to come and stop them.
It is, it's such a vivid, almost surreal image, honestly.
Yeah.
Armed men guarding illegal pharmacists out in woods.
It really is. I mean, it sounds like a movie plot, but it is entirely real. And it's actually the starting point for our mission today. So welcome to this deep dive.
Thanks. I'm glad we're doing this one.
Yeah, today we're taking you into a very specific and, quite frankly, a very dark chapter of American history. We're looking at a stack of historical dossiers, court documents, and some highly specific 1977 Idaho newspaper clippings.
And we are examining a really specific hinge point in time here.
Right, exactly. We are tracking the exact moment when a broad, kind of chaotic anti-government movement in the Pacific Northwest suddenly mutated. It mutated into one of the most notorious neo-Nazi organizations in the country.
And I think we need to say right up front, this requires a pretty grave, sober register from us today.
Very much so. The topics today involve real extremism, real racism, and antisemitism. Our goal is to factually and, impartially trace how ordinary resentment against distant authority just completely curdled into something incredibly dark.
And that Wisconsin factory is, well, it's the perfect lens to start with because it shows you exactly what that movement looked like before the mutation happened.
Right.
It shows you the raw material, essentially.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our sources show a syndicated column. It was published on June 30th, 1977 in the Idaho Falls Post-Register.
Yeah, I have that clipping right here.
And this column detailed that the group running this armed lateral factory was called the Posse Comitatus.
The Posse Comitatus, right?
Now, I've heard that name thrown around in historical contexts before, but usually it's associated with, tax protests and land disputes.
Yes, mostly out west.
Right. So I'm struggling to see the through line here. How does a rural anti-government group end up functioning as a militant pharmaceutical outfit?
So what's fascinating here is, to understand that, you really have to look under the hood at the actual mechanics of what the Posse Comitatus believed.
Okay, what did they believe?
Well, their name literally translates from Latin as the power of the county.
Power of the county.
Right. And their central defining doctrine, the absolute core of their entire worldview, was the belief that the county sheriff is the highest legitimate law enforcement officer in the United States.
Wait, really? So they believed that anyone above the county level, like the FBI or the IRS or the Bureau of Land Management, they just had absolutely no legal authority.
None. None whatsoever. In their reading of the Constitution, the federal government had just wildly overstepped its bounds and had essentially become this occupying illegitimate force.
Wow.
Yeah, and once you adopt that specific mechanical belief, well, your resistance isn't just about taxes anymore. It applies to literally everything the federal government touches.
Okay, wow, that makes the lateral factory suddenly make perfect sense. It wasn't that they were just deeply, passionate about alternative medicine.
No, not entirely.
It's that the FDA, which is a federal alphabet agency, had banned lateral.
Exactly. The FDA said you couldn't have this cancer treatment. So for the Posse Comitatus, manufacturing it, even with armed guards, it became the ultimate act of political defiance.
They were practically begging the FDA to show up in their county.
Yeah, they wanted them to show up just so they could challenge their jurisdiction.
That is wild.
And the lateral factory is really proof of just how immense and sprawling this anti-federal milieu had become by the late 1970s.
It was a huge umbrella.
A massive umbrella. The rejection of federal authority had expanded from those traditional Western grievances like logging roads and grazing rights, all the way into medicine and this new concept of health freedom.
And to really paint a picture of how broad this was for you listening right now, we have to look at what was happening simultaneously out west.
Right, because it wasn't just happening in Wisconsin.
Exactly. The sources detail a specific incident just a year prior, in 1976, involving a family called the Patrons.
Ah, yeah, the Patrons. That is a crucial piece of this puzzle.
So the Patrons were independent gold miners in Idaho, and they ended up in this intensely tense armed standoff with United States Forest Service workers.
Over an unpatented mining claim.
Yeah, exactly. They were fiercely defiant, and they actually carried rifles to stop what they saw as federal overreach on their land.
Which was a very common sentiment.
So, on one hand, you have these independent miners in Idaho who are just furious about land use. And on the other hand, you have health freedom advocates in Wisconsin guarding unapproved cancer cures.
It's a huge spectrum.
It is. And I'm just trying to picture how a movement this decentralized, with so many wildly different specific goals, actually functions. Does a coalition of the alienated like that just naturally fall apart?
Well, left to its own devices, yes, it usually fractures.
Really?
Yeah, because a movement defined solely by what it is against, in this case, distant federal authority, it has a fatal flaw. It lacks a cohesive, positive vision for the future.
So it's just like a massive ideological vacuum.
Exactly. It's a vacuum.
Yeah.
But as we know, in the world of political extremism, an ideological vacuum is rarely empty for long.
Right. Nature abhors a vacuum.
Especially political nature. That scattered, chaotic energy. I mean, we're talking about thousands of angry, armed, anti-government citizens who fundamentally distrusted the establishment.
It was a massive vulnerability.
It was. They were searching for a unifying narrative.
Wow.
And in the summer of 1977, one man realized he could weaponize that exact vulnerability.
Because that decentralized chaos of the lateral front and, the mining disputes, it's about to be violently funneled into a single terrifying direction.
Yes, we're moving our focus entirely to Kootenai County, Idaho, July 1977.
This is just weeks after that lateral story ran in the Post-Register.
Exactly right.
Okay, so the sources introduce us to a man named Richard Butler. At this time, Butler is essentially the Grand Marshal of the Kootenai County Posse Comitatus.
And he was already a known figure locally.
Yeah, he had actually made a significant name for himself a couple of years earlier in 1975. He was aggressively suing to block Idaho's forestry and land use laws.
Right.
He famously stood in front of a crowd in Sandpoint, Idaho, and told them that a .30-30 rifle made a perfectly good substitute for a building permit.
Which, I mean, is incredibly militant.
Very.
But if you look closely at the substance of what he's saying in 1975, it's still rooted in that traditional, localized, anti-government sentiment.
He's talking about land use. He's talking about building permits.
Right. It's extreme, definitely, but it's recognizable as a rural grievance.
But then comes July 1977. Butler shifts his tactics entirely.
He really does.
He seeks local tax exemptions in Hayden Lake for a newly formed organization. He calls it the Church of Jesus Christ Christian.
And this is the turning point.
It is. When he files for this, he makes a highly public announcement. And I am going to read Butler's exact 1977 quote from the historical record, because this is the specific hinge point of our deep dive today.
Let's hear it.
Butler announced to the press that the local Posse Comitatus, quote, has pretty much disbanded, and the survivors are now members of the National Emancipation of the White Seed.
Wow. That is the moment, right there in the text.
It's chilling.
It is. That is anti-government posse activism flowing directly, deliberately into overt white supremacy.
I am totally stuck on this pivot, honestly. Going from arcane legal theories about county sheriffs and, building permits to national emancipation of the white seed.
It's a massive jump.
It doesn't just feel like a leap. It feels like jumping to a completely different planet of grievance. What is the actual mechanism connecting these two things?
It's a great question.
Like, how do you convince a guy who is mad at the Forest Service to join a racial holy war?
Right. Well, to understand how Butler engineered that leap, you have to understand the specific theology of the church he founded.
The Church of Jesus Christ Christian.
Exactly. It wasn't just a tax shelter. It was the institutional front for a religious movement called Christian identity.
What exactly does that theology entail? And again, I know we need to be really careful and clear here.
Yes, and before we dive into this, it's important to remind everyone listening that we are examining these hateful ideologies strictly as historical documents.
Absolutely. We are impartially reporting the facts of the source material to show exactly what the posse mutated into.
We are not endorsing any of these politically charged or extremist viewpoints. We are just documenting them.
Correct. So what is Christian identity?
Christian identity is a deeply, deeply extremist theology that fundamentally rewrites biblical history.
How so?
Its core tenet is the belief that white Northern Europeans are the literal biological descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. They believe they are God's true chosen people. And consequently, Christian identity teaches that Jewish people are the literal biological offspring of Satan, and that all other non-white races are, well, they call them mud peoples, created before Adam and Eve, essentially subhuman.
So this isn't just prejudice. This is an elaborate theological framework for explicit, undeniable neo-Nazism.
Absolutely. And we have to name it plainly without any euphemisms. The national emancipation of the white seed and the Aryan Nations compound that Butler built at Hayden Lake, they were rooted in virulent racism and antisemitism.
Right.
But to answer your question about how Butler used this to capture the anti-government crowd, you have to look at how Christian identity functions mechanically. It acts as a bridge.
A bridge. How does it do that?
Think about the mindset of the Posse Comitatus member in the 1970s.
Okay, I'm thinking about the guy with the 30-30 rifle.
Right. They already believe that a shadowy, illegitimate cabal has hijacked the federal government. Right?
Yes, that's their whole thing.
They already believe the IRS and the Federal Reserve are stealing their wealth. What Christian identity theology does is take that existing political paranoia and give the cabal a face and a cosmic purpose.
Oh, wow.
Butler stepped in and essentially said, you are right to hate the federal government, but you're wrong about who they are.
He gave them a new villain.
He told them, they aren't just overreaching bureaucrats in Washington. They are literal agents of a satanic, racially impure, international Jewish conspiracy meant to destroy the white race.
Oh my God. So it's a form of ideological laundering.
Ideological laundering is the exact right term for it.
He takes this raw, localized, sometimes legitimate frustration about logging regulations or, taxes, and he launders it through this incredibly dark theological machinery.
Yes. Butler recognized that the conspiratorial style that had been brewing in the rural Northwest throughout the 60s and 70s had primed these people.
It softened the ground for him.
Precisely. When you spend years steeped in a culture that views the federal government as an absolute existential enemy, you become conditioned to accept grand apocalyptic narratives.
And Butler just supplied the apocalypse.
Exactly. He handed them the script.
And that completely redefines the enemy. I mean, if you're fighting the Forest Service over a mining claim, you might bring a rifle to a standoff, but ultimately you just want them to leave you alone so you can mine your gold.
Right. You want autonomy.
But if you believe the government is a literal demonic entity trying to eradicate your race, well, the goal isn't to be left alone anymore.
No, it's not.
The goal is to destroy the government.
Precisely. And this is why historians pinpoint July 1977 as such a massive paradigm shift.
It really is a hinge point.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, look at the broader historical context of the American West. Resentment of the federal government was practically baked into the soil.
Oh, yeah.
But it had never looked like this.
Right, because there were earlier movements that were fiercely anti-government but had absolutely nothing to do with this kind of racial extremism.
Exactly. Our dossiers specifically highlight the 1941 State of Jefferson movement, for example.
Oh, yeah, the State of Jefferson.
This was a massive, highly publicized rebellion in the Pacific Northwest where armed men literally set up roadblocks near Eureka, California, and proclaimed they were seceding to form a 51st state.
And what were they upset about exactly?
Infrastructure, mostly.
Infrastructure, like roads.
Yeah, roads. They were furious about being governed and taxed by far-off state capitals that refused to pave their roads or, support their timber and mining industries.
So it was a classic, militant, resource-driven, rural rebellion.
Exactly. Completely non-racial. Or you can look at the John Birch Society in the 1960s.
Right, the Birchers.
They were deeply, fiercely anti-communist, highly suspicious of the United Nations, and entirely against federal overreach.
But again, not a white supremacist group.
Right. The Birchers were explicitly non-racialist. They were focused on legal, electoral dissent, and constitutional fundamentalism.
So what Richard Butler did at Hayden Lake was something entirely unprecedented for that specific anti-government tradition.
It was a complete perversion of it. Butler achieved the weaponization of rural isolation for explicit neo-Nazi organizing.
That's a powerful way to put it.
He took a geographic landscape that had historically served as a refuge for independent, anti-authoritarian thinkers, and he turned it into a fortified compound for organized racial extremism.
He took a European style of anti-Semitic fascism and violently grafted it onto the American frontier tradition of the rugged anti-tax pioneer.
He did.
Which makes it incredibly vital for us as we examine this timeline to draw a very hard, historically accurate boundary.
Yes, absolutely.
Because if Butler was engaged in ideological laundering, we have to look closely at who actually bought what he was selling and who didn't.
This is where historical precision is paramount. The sources mandate a very careful distinction between the broad, anti-government milieu we started with and the explicitly neo-Nazi movement it produced at Hayden Lake.
Because they are absolutely not the same thing. I keep coming back to the idea of a Venn diagram, you know?
Okay, a Venn diagram.
Yeah, like one circle is a genuine, albeit sometimes militant, frustration with distant government control over local lives.
Right, the miners, the farmers.
And the other circle is organized white supremacy. In 1977, Richard Butler forcefully pulled those two circles together for his followers, but it's historically inaccurate to say everyone in the first circle belonged in the second.
That distinction is so critical.
Like, you can't logically say the independent miners like the Patron family or the health freedom advocates making Latrell in Wisconsin were part of the Aryan Nations.
No, you can't. Because while the militancy, and certainly the violent rhetoric against the government, overlapped heavily between the two groups, conflating them is a massive historical mistake.
It distorts the reality.
If you conflate the John Birchers, or the frustrated gold miners, or the tax protesters with explicitly neo-Nazi groups like the Aryan Nations, you actually dilute the seriousness of the racialist turn.
I want to make sure I fully understand that. How does blurring those lines actually dilute the history?
Because if you paint everyone who resents federal land management with the same broad brush, if you label every angry armed pioneer a neo-Nazi, you lose the ability to see the specific, deliberate mechanics of radicalization.
You stop seeing how it actually happens.
You lose the ability to spot the architects. Radicalization from a tax dispute to a racial holy war isn't an automatic pipeline.
It's not just a slippery slope.
No, it isn't inevitable. It requires a catalyst. It requires someone like Richard Butler to intentionally bridge that gap.
Right.
Understanding that distinction trains you to see how ordinary, everyday grievance is hijacked.
It's the difference between a spontaneous fire and intentional arson.
Exactly. And if you think every fire is just the natural state of the forest, you stop looking for the arsonist with the matches.
Wow. Okay, so bringing this all together for you. We started this deep dive looking for a hinge point in the muddy waters of radical history, and the summer of 1977 provided it with terrifying clarity.
It really did.
We saw how a broad, chaotic, anti-federal movement, this massive umbrella spanning everything from armed disputes over mining claims in Idaho to illegal, unapproved cancer treatments manufactured in Wisconsin, served as an unwitting incubator.
An ideological void waiting to be filled.
Exactly. It was a movement defined entirely by its hatred of distant authority, which left a massive ideological void.
And into that void stepped Richard Butler.
Right.
He took the existing framework of the Posse Comitatus, this belief that the federal government had no jurisdiction, and he used the theology of Christian identity to launder that political grievance into an apocalyptic racial holy war.
He gave the institutional seed of the Aryan Nations a permanent home at Hayden Lake. And the reason understanding this precise historical mechanism matters to you today, the reason we examine these uncomfortable source documents, is because it trains you to read the modern landscape.
That is the big takeaway.
It helps you recognize the subtle line between everyday, legitimate political grievance, even loud, angry, militant grievance, and actual anti-democratic extremism.
Right.
It shows you mechanically how a movement's stated goals about freedom or taxes can be quietly discarded by bad actors, replaced with something far more sinister, all while using the original legitimate anger as a human shield.
It forces us to never assume a movement is only what it claims to be on the surface. You always have to ask what the architects are actually building underneath.
Which leaves me with a final thought I want you to mull over on your own. It builds on everything we've unpacked about how extremists hijack legitimate anger.
I'm listening.
If a generalized hatred of distant authority, like anger over logging roads or tax codes, can serve as a Trojan horse for a highly organized, explicitly racist movement, well, what happens to those extreme factions if the original legitimate grievances are actually resolved?
That's a tough question.
If the government fixes the roads or settles the mining claims, does the extremist parasite wither away because it lost its cover? Or has it simply learned to survive by moving on, hunting for a brand new grievance to attach itself to?
That is the ultimate question about the survival of extremism.
The history of radicalization is rarely a straight, clean line. The danger is always in the murky transitions, in the moments when ordinary anger is quietly forged into something dangerous. And the only way to spot that mutation before it takes hold is to look closely, understand the mechanics, and never stop asking who is really holding the matches.